they've got a page, right? The scientific Blackpill that kind of collates all of these little factoids. And again, it's not as if those things are wrong in and of itself, but it's a little cherry picked, and it doesn't provide the nuanced understanding of the world that's kind of necessary um, in order to understand it. So, well, it's great that, they at least want to try to validate their claims with research literature. Um, at the same time, that if you're not going about it in the right way, if you're basically just trying to find stuff that justifies what you already believe, that's different than saying, hey, I read the literature and I've come to this conclusion. Instead, you've come to a conclusion and you're trying to find stuff that reinforces that belief.
I mean, I agree, but I don't think that criticism that you have is objective. Like, it's not really, we can't use it to handle the data that is thrown at us, basically. Um, because we can't know in what order they have picked the data, right? I mean, maybe they first had the thought and then they picked the data. Maybe they didn't, right? Who can prove? How can we prove that? Like, what would be the, how would you look at the data and decide if it's a valuable statistic on women's mating choices, for example?
Well, it would be the consistency in which you find something. So if I go about randomly going on, say, Google Scholar, and I want to look at something, right? Women's mate choices or something like that, or mating preferences, you're going to come across a whole lot of sometimes contradictory research or research that doesn't always replicate. And that's fine. And if you read through all of that and you come to your conclusions, great. If you go, hey, I went through this literature and it's all really consistent, you've clearly cherry picked your way through it, because that's the nature of psychological research, is that you're not going to find consistency time and time and time and time and time again, because things can be impacted by your sample, they can be impacted by your the measures you're using, the way in which you operationalize things. So there's very little that we can say really as definitively as they are trying to portray it. They are kind of putting it in a way that, well, the science says this, and here is evidence, and that you're going, okay, there is evidence, but there's also lots of evidence kind of to the contrary to indicate that those might not be the case. So I think you can somewhat figure out the order in which they've come to those conclusions simply based on what they've chosen to take out of it. Because if you had no vested interest one way or the other, you wouldn't end up selecting all one type of outcome over the other.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess you would get an F probably. I don't know, the worst grade in the US is F, right? You would probably get an F for your review when you would do that in the university. But if you want to, I don't know, if you're a normal person that just wants to know, basically one thing that is really important for many incels is, should I give up or not, right? Like this idea of, is it over?
Well, and I guess that what I should go back and say is, if I want to find an article that says that facial symmetry is important in women's dating decision makings, I can find articles for that. If I want to look for articles that say that how muscular a man is important in women's dating decisions, I can find articles for that. But I can also find articles that say that women care, or some that will say that women care more about a man's kindness, or women really highly value men's sense of humor.
But then
So you
they
can kind of find any of those things if you're looking specifically for that. And that's different than going in and saying, okay, what is the most important, or what are the most important factors in women's dating decision making?
wait, but for the first two, okay, I agree, and also I think the incels agree, and everybody agrees. Like, you will probably find statistics about facial symmetry and muscles and stuff like that. But for the kindness one, I haven't worked my way through the statistics yet, but I know, for example, for a fact that one of the favorite statistics of Blackpill forums is the dark triad personality uh, study. And I don't know, I feel like most people, it's not even a gendered thing. I think many people are really attracted to toxic people. It's
Well,
it's not that I don't
I
feel like
mean,
it's that
again, you're going to be
controversial.
looking at they're citing, I think, 2 studies out of probably hundreds that have looked at this. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really tough to know, okay, how consistent is this, and how strong was that association, right? So if someone does this research study, let's say, and they have, right, normally we'd say, oh, if you had 10,000 people in your study, that's really good, right? You've got a really good representative sample.
Mm-hmm.
But that means that lots of things come out as significant that are really, really, really minor. So if I told you that, yeah, you're right, women are more attracted to men with dark personalities, but that explains 0.1% of their dating decisions, you'd
Mm-hmm.
probably go, okay, that doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's what's kind of missing in a lot of their interpretations, is they don't understand whether the size of the effect really matters, and how consistently that effect is found.
Mm-hmm.
Because that
Have
could be noise, right?
mm-hmm.
I could run the
True.
same
Yeah,
study and
sure.
then I find it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also can be harder to publish things where you don't find something. So there's always going to be that sort of bias towards something that's significant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know how that particular study looked at how they would rate the dark triad, or how they would rate a man scoring highly. But you also think part of the dark triad is narcissism, right? Well, that's portrayed as really confident. Yeah, people are going to find someone who's more confident, more attractive,
Mm-hmm.
within reason, right? Obviously, someone, if they come across as just like really, narcissistic and really self-centered, then you might
Self-important.
find all of a sudden you don't find them as attractive. Um, and some of the dark triad traits are also kind of border a little bit on ambition, right? Well, people generally find people who have ambition as more attractive. Maybe that's why it's actually driving it. It has nothing to do with someone being mean. It's that there's conceptual overlap with someone who's ambitious, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were trying to set your mate up with somebody and you said, yeah, you should meet this person. Uh, they're very confident, they're very ambitious. They might say, okay, cool. They might meet them and find out they're actually like more cutthroat and manipulative, and they might not like that. So the other thing that one needs to consider, and what I think is missed in some of the research they're citing, is there's a difference between initial impressions and long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being There might be some things that correlate a little bit with success in the short term, right? Maybe it is dark personality, I don't know. But that I do know that relates with poorer long-term outcomes in relationships. So, do you want to possess a trait,
But if you have
or do you want to?
if you have zero, then you would be fine with short term as well, right? So you don't really care about the long term.
Well, and I mean that's one element of this, right? The other, though, is that they'll use that to claim that women don't care about kindness. And that's not really the take-home message of that. And, I mean, depending, right? If you're going out to the club on Friday night, if you're going out tonight, and you're looking for something short term, you might not necessarily care about how much time that person, I don't know, volunteers at a charity, right? Because that's not you're not looking to build a life around that person. You might just be looking for a little bit of fun, right? And there's lots of, evolutionary psych research on like short-term and long-term mating strategies. So the and and that would be true for anybody, and not just women, as kind of incels are portraying it. You might have different expectations, or maybe even lower expectations of someone that you're just looking to have a little bit of fun with in the short term versus someone you're going to settle down and marry. So
I mean, there will be a short. There will be there. I agree, but most long-term relationships start short-term, right? And also in a society where there is no direct plans, or like in a very liberal society, like short-term is how it all starts, right? Mostly.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I mean, technically, right, just from a obvious standpoint, everything long term had to start as a short term, but that doesn't mean that every long term relationship started as like let's say a casual sexual encounter. It might have progressed fairly linearly and not, been one thing for a while and then progressed.
I feel like the
But
healthy thing would be that there is the short term just needs the sexual attraction, right? You just need that, and then for the long term you need more than that. And the more than that you find out about it, maybe initially you already know that sometimes you have a short term relationship where you already know, okay, there is no potential for long term, but mostly you have a short term thing and you say, okay, for the rest, let's see, I will find out in the course of
yeah,
how, like, when I meet this person and get to know this person. um so I feel like the problem mostly is with the, I mean, you have talked about secure attachment styles, which is also pretty important, obviously after the initial sexual attraction, which is probably also very important for rejection. um yeah, so what's the um how do we I don't feel like it's a good argument to talk about long-term relationships when the biggest problem seems to be the initial attraction and the I feel like that's the biggest problem. I don't know if it even is, maybe it isn't, but it seems
well,
like, yeah,
when you talk to a lot of incels, what they really want is something long term.
true.
So, you know, like again, there's obviously going to be some that would be happy, and I mean, most of them would probably be happy with something over nothing. But what they're looking for is long term intimacy, and I don't necessarily just mean like sexual intimacy. I mean romantic intimacy, emotional intimacy,
I
right?
agree.
And
Hmm.
I mean, you can have that absolutely in short term relationships, but they are looking for a lot of the things that one gets out of a committed long-term relationship. So if they're looking at research on what people care about in short-term relationships, it might not help them a whole lot, and it might make them feel worse about themselves. Because when we're looking for something short-term, we do tend to maybe be a little bit more um, shallow at times.
Yeah,
And as I said, people will value things like kindness and loyalty differently if you're looking for someone for a long term. So you don't want to give themselves the impression that, say, women don't care about loyalty, because they do, and they care about it more in the context where they're looking. So you don't want them to take the results of some of these studies that might look at like initial attraction, um, and conclude that people don't care about those things, right? That's kind of the danger in misinterpreting this body of literature. And you mentioned attachment. So attachment really reflects your views of relationships and your needs in relationships, and effectively how much you trust the other person. And what's concerning is that across multiple studies, and this seems to be also something that really comes out uniquely, um, is that incels don't have what we would call secure attachment, right? They don't necessarily have a lot of trust in sort of a hypothetical partner, um, caring for them and staying with them and showing them love and just trusting that they are loved by that person. And this is a problem for anyone who scores low in secure attachment. But it can also derail good relationships, right? You can be in a good loving relationship with someone, but if one partner is always suspicious or being seen as constantly needing validation all the time, it might actually cause that relationship to dissolve because they're seen as being needy or untrustworthy, and maybe that untrustworthiness leads them to go through someone's phone or violate someone's privacy. So it's really sad because you have this group of people who really want a relationship, but they might hold some beliefs or might have some insecurities that would then torpedo any relationship they get into. And then that might end up being, a circular thing of, well, I wanted her, I don't know, to tell me she loved me every day. And she felt that was needy, so she left me. Therefore, I was right in assuming that she didn't love me. So it can become a problem, and that's why I think that's something that's really important. If an incel goes to therapy or something like that, and they do want to someday be in a relationship, um, making sure that they've got healthy enough attitudes about relationships so that they can thrive and have what they want.
Is there any way to see if that I mean, as far as I understand it, insecure attachment is mostly not mostly not only show in your romantic relationships, but also in I think in childhood, in the way you are with your parents. It's already influenced. Like there could one could draw conclusions if you could ask, like if you ask about the relationship with the parent, you could maybe get an idea of, you could get out of this chicken and egg situation, because I can imagine that an insecure attachment style can develop over a lot of after a lot of rejection, right?
Yes, well, and
Like,
yeah, and I wasn't going to suggest that they became, you know, that they developed this as adults, right? The attachment theory is based on your relationships with your caregivers. But obviously, more things can impact it. But what's interesting with knowing that, we have birth here and we have current day here, and, at this point, incels have insecure attachment, um, is that between these two time points, um, incels have made it pretty clear that they face a lot of social rejection, like throughout adolescence. A lot of bullying. Their peers weren't very good to them. They were excluded. Um, those things can also impact, the way in which you view how healthy relationships are and how much you trust other people. Because maybe, yeah, you had a bit of a negligent parent, but you grew up and um, you had really good friends, right? They always had your back. They really cared about you. Whenever you needed them, they were there, right? You might ultimately grow up and have a good, healthy view of relationships. And it might even help you recognize that, hey, maybe your relationship with one of your parents wasn't as healthy as it should have been, and you understand why. But it sounds like for incels, I don't fully know what their home life was. Some of them expressed, a good relationship with at least one of their parents. Some didn't really mention them at all. Um, but by and large, they didn't have good relations with their peers growing up. So even if mom and dad were really good and caring, um, they grew up feeling like their peers and those around them. And of course, it's obviously the peers that you were going to date and ultimately marry, um, didn't care about them. And, so undoubtedly that's had an impact on how willing they are to trust others. Right? Or they might view, well, yeah, I can trust my mom and dad because I have to, and they have to love me. But, for people who don't, they're not going to. So, there's those elements as well to this. So there's a lot going on for incels as a collective.